Every single tech advance that has come into offices in our lives promises to make things easier, but actually we end up working harder and longer. How do we bring ourselves and our workforces and our leadership teams and our clients together in a way that is not going to overwhelm us, not going to anger us, not going to make us feel that we're languishing?
Of all of the external authority figures, people trust business above any of the others. Is this a real opportunity for business?
If we think about who we are as people, those are our, if we want to call it tribe at work. And businesses and organisations and leaders have a chance to really make the most of that because we do trust people we're close to.
This episode is brought to you by Instant Impact. Instant Impact provides transformative talent solutions to small and mid-sized companies that are making between 30 and 500 hires each year. If your recruitment's giving you a headache and you don't know where to start, then give the team at Instant Impact a call or visit www.instant-impact.com for more information.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. Why is everyone so miserable at work? Are you just getting older and grumpier? No, I think it's everyone. It's your colleagues, your team, and you see it in the stats as well. Engagement scores are tanking. People continue to quiet quit, and no one seems to have the energy that they had even a few years ago. What has happened? Isabel Berwick is the Financial Times working it editor and author of The Future-Proof Career. She spends her time investigating the big workforce trends that are shaping the world of business and careers today. And we're going to get stuck into this topic of workforce happiness, unhappiness, and what on earth is going on in between. Isabel, welcome to the show.
Felix, thank you for having me.
So what's going on? When did you first notice this shift towards people being so miserable?
What, the languishing shift?
The languishing shift.
Probably 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, it kind of has come in tandem with a rise in polarization in society, the rise of populist politics, the backlash against DEI, and then on top of that, we've had AI, the promise and threat of AI, and now AI rollout. So there's an internal kind of disruption thing going on in a lot of organizations, and then the external world is also a pretty choppy place.
It certainly is. So I guess this is going to be one of those episodes where we see that maybe work can't just be cut off from the rest of the piece. But so much going on. Are we talking sort of overwhelm here? Is it uncertainty? What's sort of sitting behind how people are feeling?
Yeah, I think, on an internal kind of individual or team level, there is overwhelm and people are working probably flat out. Every single tech advance that has come into offices in our lives promises to make things easier, but actually we end up working harder and longer. And I think that has just accelerated with the idea that we have to also be learning AI or maybe even training AI to do our job. And then the bigger thing is just so hard to comprehend. I think it can be overwhelming to try to follow the news cycle at the moment. I work on a global news brand and I follow the news every day. And I think this probably started around maybe even with the Scottish referendum vote, which really divided people there. If we look at how toxic that debate got, if we think back to when this started, I'm going to say as a journalist, I started to really notice a lot of toxic debate around the Scottish independence referendum in 2014. Then we had Brexit, Donald Trump. We've had a lot of things going on in Europe. All of these macro things affect us as people. And at the same time, internally, in a lot of organizations, we had the rise of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, which was incredibly helpful in terms of building more diverse workforces, but it also created a backlash. And we're seeing that playing out now on the global stage, as well as in organizations.
Sort of a ramping of polarization, really. If you track it through, as you say, the Scottish referendum, we've got Brexit, we've got all the politics going on in the States, you've got Israel, Gaza, Russia, Ukraine. Just sort of feels like the nuance has gone out of our sort of conversation. You mentioned AI within all of this, but I wonder, it kind of really feels like social media is also still really at play here.
Mm-hmm. So we all have used social media, or most of us use social media in our personal lives, and particularly younger generations have been brought up on it. So to keep that separate from the workplace is impossible. And in fact, one of the most interesting insights I had last year was thinking about how Instagram started in 2010, I think, and the aesthetic of Instagram, even if you're not on Instagram, has come into almost everything we do, including the workplace. So that kind of the way of presenting things, curating things look much better visually than they used to do. When we're doing our internal communications, they have to be to a much higher standard.
And shorter,
much shorter. And I think that's something that's been thought about, because so there's extra layers. You can't just type out an email to the whole office now. There's a kind of expectation that we will put some effort in to how our aesthetic looks internally. So all of these things add work. They may be tech enabled, but they're extra thought processes that people are having to go through. So the external world has affected us politically, it's affected us aesthetically. And I think that, you have a lot of HR listeners. If we think back a few years, the very trendy thing was bring your whole self to work. Employee resource groups were all the rage. We've seen a massive retreat from that. And I sort of understand why, because if every single person is prioritizing their individual identity or their identities at work, and you're dealing with a very polarized political climate, there's going to be clashes. There's going to be people who are not work. In the Edelman Trust survey recently, a fair proportion of people were saying that they wouldn't do their best work for a boss they disagreed with politically. And I think that's something that we just have to be so careful of now. How do we bring ourselves and our workforces and our leadership teams and our clients together in a way that is not going to overwhelm us, not going to anger us, not going to make us feel that we're languishing? These are the big challenges.
I think there's such an interesting, you mentioned two things here, HR led in both cases. I think the EDI push and the bring your whole self to work push. And I think they sort of follow a sort of logical, there's a really clear logical flow to it, I think, for so the modern listener, which is basically why should you have to be one person in work and one person out of work? And I think that in a lot of ways, it only popped into my head just now that you were talking, in a lot of ways, some of us quite like being someone different at work. It can be a bit of a relief to be work Felix and then home Felix. And at work Felix, I don't have to worry about, being a dad or, whatever else is going on. And I think having eroded those might have had some unforeseen consequences of, well, actually, you're not allowed to switch off from whatever's stressing you out at home or geopolitically or whatever that is, because there's this sort of push for vulnerability. Now, I get the other side of things, which is we've got to build trust, we've got to make people comfortable. But in some of these, it sounds like you're saying we've gone a little bit far.
I think the balance is coming back, and I think there'll be some very important advances in terms of fairer hiring practices, fairer recruitment and retention. But I think that word fairness is actually at the centre of things now. Am I being treated fairly at work? Have I got a fair chance of promotion? Is my boss someone who is fair and I trust? And that goes for whoever you are. So I think moving to a different way of tackling the malaise that we have internally and externally might be to offer a kind of, obviously it's never going to be a level playing field. We're all biased human beings, but to try to make everything much fairer, right from the recruitment part through to exits, interviews, or trying to retain staff or letting them go in a fair and compassionate way. I think that's the conversation that people are starting to have now.
It's in a lot of ways, I'm a massively over-optimist, by the way, so I always try and see the silver lining before the cloud. But you mentioned the trust survey. I think the other thing that it showed that I found really interesting is that people of all of the external authority figures, people trust business above any of the others. With this shift to fairness, is this a real opportunity for business to up their, I don't want to say power, but sort of, I guess, up their perception when compared to governments and your very fine media?
Yeah, sadly, the journalists are not doing too well. Yes, absolutely, because as humans, we have proximity bias. We trust the people who are closest to us. And if we think about the work of Robin Dunbar, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Not.
He's an evolutionary biologist, I think, but the Dunbar's number is 150, which you may have heard, which is the number of people that you can know in real life. You can have many more friends than that in social media. You can have many more loose ties than that, but that's probably the number of people you might invite to a wedding, for example.
You've got a huge budget.
But in our smaller groups, the ideal team number is probably 5, and the ideal bigger team number is probably 15. So we haven't changed in an evolutionary way from when we were hunter-gatherers. We relate in these small groups, and I think a business is, it might be a very small business or it might be a bigger business that's divided into teams or departments. And I think that's, if we think about who we are as people, those are our, if we want to call it tribe at work. And businesses and organizations and leaders have a chance to really, exactly, make the most of that, because we do trust people we're close to. And of course, our relationship with our employer is, it's not the same as with our friends. They can fire us. It can end badly. But actually, if you are fair and you're communicating, and that's not, I think, the strongman trope, which is coming back in business. We've, obviously Elon Musk most famously, but some other CEOs are seizing this moment of essentially, a very difficult job market. They've got the upper hand. People are not leaving. But actually, why would you be a strongman when you get the better result from people trusting you in a very profound way? And you don't have to be all vulnerable and talk about your mental health all the time, although fair enough, if you want to, that's fine. But I think that moment of 5 years ago has evolved into something perhaps more sophisticated. And I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, and we talk about culture quite a lot on this show. And the more we talk about it, the more I kind of realize, I'm going to sound very American with this word authentic, but I think that it's incumbent on leaders to figure out who their authentic self is and just embrace it. And I think actually there is room for strongmen leadership, because some people like working in businesses run by strong people who take that sort of authoritarian approach to things, but just be honest about it. This is who we are. This is our culture. For other organizations, that more vulnerable way of working might work much better, and then your team should self-select into either one of those sorts of companies. And where people get in trouble is they pretend to be one when they're the other, or they pretend, and then people join, and 6 months in, like, oh, actually, this isn't what I signed up for at all. So weirdly, I think, to your point around tribes, you're going to have your tribes that, like, your Vikings, sorry, Scandinavian listeners, who like, pillaging Cornish fishing villages, and then you'll have the Cornish fishing villages. I don't know where that metaphor came from, but that's
so it's but it's a kind of transparency.
Yeah.
And I think for leaders, the challenge probably now is to, if we say, I think authentic's an interesting word, but I would probably say, what are the parts of you that you can show to your workforce? And it has to be the real you, but it's not the whole of you, but actually the things that brought you to this leadership role. What are they? And be quite reflective about them. And I think a lot of leadership coaches are working with leaders now on these things, because the nature of leadership has changed. Because we're all so used to social media, we expect a level of, if I say intimacy, you know what I mean? It's that direct access. So we've seen the rise of CEOs on LinkedIn putting 90-second videos up. That's a big trend. Obviously, lots of them have got teams of people who are doing it for them. But there has to be a kernel of, I'm seeing something of the real person here. And without them exactly showing us their pets or their lovely vacation villa. You know what I mean? It's like that stuff is the kind of politics of envy is growing. And I think for CEOs and leaders to focus on the work at hand and the job at hand and the purpose of the business has become much more important as we see the rise of global resentment.
Oh, that's very interesting. Just on that last point of access to CEOs, before we pull it back to happiness, I was listening to the Rest is Entertainment, and they were talking about the difference in K-pop celebrity culture, where there's almost this sort of expectation of complete access to celebrities and how that's sort of bleeding over to us over here. And maybe that sort of bled into corporate leaders as well.
It has. And I think that for the leaders and the people who are working with them closely, it's about how do we control that access? How do we gatekeep it while also feeling that they are communicating openly with their workforce? And to the point about workforces being miserable, it's almost, I think I heard someone, I think on your podcast, saying that 99% of people they work with, their clients, say when you talk to the staff, they say we don't get enough communication from the top. And the leaders are always saying, which we try and communicate. So over communication is preferable to under communication. It won't make people happy because obviously we're often moany when we're at work. But I think it's like the bedrock, really, if you want to create a happier workforce.
And I think it almost feels like the link between happiness and moving job has broken at the moment. You did a series recently on job hugging. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what's going on there.
Yeah, so job hugging was my top trend for 2026. I did an Instagram reel for the Financial Times. It's still on our site and did pretty well. It's had hundreds of thousands of views. Job hugging is when staff are in a job, they are probably disengaged, they don't enjoy it anymore, but they're not moving because the job market's so difficult. It's a fear thing. They are scared to move, but equally they're not really producing in their current role. And I think this is going to be a growing problem for leaders this year because the job market is really difficult. And disengagement, I think Gallup suggests that only 10% of employees in the UK are fully engaged. I mean, quite a lot of them are fairly engaged on top of that. But that, whether we believe that or not, and I tend to think that people answer surveys in ways that are sometimes extreme. But I do think there's a massive disengagement problem. And job hugging is the natural result of it in a tight economic situation.
I mean, anecdotally, and I can only talk for the mid-sized companies that we work with at Instant Impact, but we've seen coming on 18 months now of single-figure attrition numbers, employee attrition numbers. And we're talking 4 years ago, that would have been people were actively hunting 20%. Like, we really want to keep it under 20%. We really want to keep it under 20%. Do I think that suddenly 10 to 15% of the team has decided that they wanted to quit for a little bit and then they decided not to? I mean, obviously not. You've just got a growing population of people within each business too afraid to quit, but not wanting to do their jobs. And I mean, I don't need to tell this audience about what a disengaged worker can do for the rest of the organization. So I wonder what do you think is going to happen there? Growing populations of people who are unhappy with their existing job, crap employment market. When does it shift?
I think there is something quite difficult here for managers and leaders that they are going to have to try to re-engage some of these people, which seems counterintuitive when you think that they're not doing their best work and are maybe dragging your performance down. But upskilling, reskilling, offering training, maybe a move sideways, I think it probably has to be done on an individual basis. You have to identify, probably with performance management, identify what's going on. Can it be fixed? Depends on what kind of organization it is. I mean, in many organizations, you can let people go, you can eliminate roles, but in other organizations, you can't let go of people just for that. So it's a really difficult thing, but it probably does require intervention and time. It's time consuming to have employees who are not pulling their weight. And I think that makes people angry. Might make the rest of the team angry. What's that stat that one unhappy employee infects 7 people around them with their misery? So the multiplication effect of the unhappy employee is much greater than the happy employee. So it's something that has to be managed fairly actively.
Yeah, it's a big problem. What are the, you mentioned sort of performance reviews, but I mean, what can companies do? We're dealing with so much, and this is one of the things that I really struggle to get my head around. As a business owner or any business leader, we're dealing with so many business critical, huge questions. You know, we've mentioned AI a couple of times. We're dealing with shifting markets, shifting demands, shifting expectations from employees. You know, they're just the ones I'm naming off the top of my head that are sort of true for all of us. How do we deal with another one crashing down on us?
I think this is one that you can delegate to the line manager. And actually, if you look at the patterns, and if people in HR probably see the patterns, it may not be the employees, it may be the manager, because you can have all the great intentions in the world. But if you're working for someone who's a poor manager or rude or, you know, is stick rather than carrot focused, or a micromanager, that is not going to help anybody be engaged in their work.
Yeah.
So the job hugging may be poor management. And I think there's a huge thing here in this particular climate around middle management, engaging them, training them. Lots of tech companies are chopping that whole middle management layer, and it seems to me incredibly short-sighted, because we need someone who's not much above us to have a personal interest in our development. And when you've got these so-called mega managers who've got, you know, 50, 60, 100 direct reports, you can't manage those people.
No.
Only the AI can manage those people. And I don't really know what the answer is.
Well, it's really, I mean, the sort of middle manager missing piece it feels like the key to so many of these challenges, and sort of investing in having world-class middle managers. Yeah, it's sort of, they're the conduit of business strategy to actual execution and adoption in the rest of the organization. So it's interesting that you say that the tech companies getting rid of them is short-sighted. Do you think that's going to be a trend that pervades other industries, or is this another Silicon Valley, what is it, 996 style piece?
I think the fact that so few companies really invest properly in management and leadership training suggests to me that they'll cut the easy things to cut, which tend to be managers, sometimes people functions. All of this stuff is vulnerable in an economic downturn, and has been before. They've already cut vast swathes of DEI people. And I just think it's so weird that we have all the research. We know what works. People work better when they're happier. And there are some easy fixes, and better management is an easy fix. You're offering people skills training that, engages them and develops them is also an easy fix. But there are, I've talked off the record to employers who won't offer a huge range of skills training to certain employees in case they leave. It's like, I've paid all this money when they're going to leave. Now, this may have changed now when you've got a cohort that isn't leaving. But certainly in the past, there's been the L&D function has been underfunded sometimes because people think they're going to leave. But also, L&D is not really engaged with by a lot of staff. So is there a way in which we can get more people to engage with it? Is there a more imaginative offering? I think in a lack of turnover environment, L&D, HR, management have a huge role to play in boosting performance.
Yeah, they really do. And we're definitely seeing in the HR space sort of shifting prioritization, really going into retention and training. I question whether that's made it up to the rest of the exec at the minute, because like you're saying, I think people functions, recruiting functions that have already been, and L&D functions already been cut to the bone, still coming under massive pressure to reduce cost. And I think you rightly point out, I think one of the things that, again, the research shows again and again, the way to really engage people and keep them in the role, the number, I think it's definitely both in the top three. You've got your job progression, and then you've got your training and development and yet it feels like such a limited focus.
And generationally, Gen Z coming into the workforce in very large numbers now when they can get a job, they expect mentoring, job progression, structure, and that often is absent. And I think part of the issue, you might have an older workforce who are not leaving, and some imaginative companies are starting to help people who are later in their careers to maybe work part-time, maybe they're part funding a new qualification, maybe they're doing explicit mentoring roles. And I think there's so much scope for this. And then that allows people to move up the org chart, such as it is now that the agents are coming for separate other jobs. But it allows this, what we might call the frozen middle, to thaw, those well-paid, middle-y people, probably 40s-ish, early 50s, who have, especially in financial services, this is true, big lifestyles, kids in private school, probably a second home. They're not moving. And actually by freeing up some of what's happening at the top and offering new skills, educational support, mentoring, other fun stuff to do with a career transition, I think this is an emerging trend. And in a world where there's very little movement internally, I think it's going to be really key.
Yes, that's so important. I'm really glad you mentioned Gen Z, because you're somewhat of an early careers specialist here. Becoming. It's such an important topic. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of Gen Z coming out of school and university into the hardest job market that I've seen. And we set the business up, Rob and I, in 2011, right at the beginning of 2011, in, I think, probably the second hardest one in my lifetime. And so I really empathize with these folks, these young folks coming out of education. So little opportunity, but it also, it does feel like a real opportunity for businesses to hire a caliber of early career person that they wouldn't have been able to hire otherwise, because they'd be going to, a tech giant or a big four or a bulge bracket bank. Always a tongue twister. So what advice would you have for businesses to get the most out of those Gen Z? Let's say they made the decision to establish or build or grow their early careers program. How can they bring in an engaged, happy Gen Z?
Yeah, and I think you've touched on it there, that many more businesses have got the chance to hire really top graduates. Now, obviously, the problem is there's many more graduates than there were. Like the previous two worst graduate job markets were at the start of the 80s and start of the 90s. Right. So I think 1982, 1983 is the worst ever graduate job market. But think how many fewer graduates there were then. We've got a glut. There are arguably too many universities and too many graduates now. So you have got a chance to get graduates from top institutions with great degrees if you're not, as you say, blue chip anything. But, the offering has to be attractive and it has to be long term. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is early career mentoring and sponsorship. And I think companies could be much more explicit about how they do that. That's a huge draw, because when you've got somebody who's more senior in the company, who you can talk to, who can take you to events, who can introduce you to their network, that's a massive advantage that is going to help you in the rest of your career. And I think it's been hugely underdeveloped, apart from in very big organizations with sort of established mentoring programs. And the other one is reverse mentoring, which I'm really interested in, which is where, these younger recruits are actually mentoring older people. And in an intergenerational or multi-generational workforce, that works really well, because I think there are so many things, and clients and the market and the way that people consume stuff is changing so rapidly. Why wouldn't you be listening to the people who are the consumers now and in the future?
No, certainly is. Yeah, we have one Instant Impact, and you learn so much from younger folks and just get a different perspective.
But it goes both ways. I mean, I think for Gen Z, a lot of the people coming to the workforce now spent a long time in their bedrooms on their computer, either at university or school, online. It's not healthy. It's had a massive impact. We're only really at the beginning of seeing those impacts. So employers, I think, have a duty to show the human side of work, to encourage people to go to meetings, to encourage people to learn what used to be called soft skills, but I would now call human skills of communication, in-person communication, in-person meetings, being on a panel. All of this stuff has to come from being learned. And I think that it's often left by the wayside, although I think KPMG is starting to offer classes in this for their graduate cohorts. And I think probably lots of other companies will do the same.
That's so important. And I mean, I do think so many of these issues, I know this is going to be a bit fuddy-duddy and it's certainly not the sort of going point, but I think so many of these issues can be solved with a bit of a return to more days in the office. I mean, that human relationship piece, the reversal of the trends of just sleeping in your bedroom, working in your bedroom, popping to your shared kitchen to have some lunch, going back to your bedroom, basically being lonely as a young worker. I think so much of that can be solved by 2-3 days a week in the office, seeing the whites of your colleagues' eyes and having a joke around the coffee machine. So I wonder, within this piece around engagement and happiness and training and young folks, what's your perspective on office or no office?
No, I'm very much a fan of the office. In fact, I kept going into the office during the pandemic, except when we were in high lockdown. Not every day, but sometimes. And I think, but there is a responsibility on employees. You can't just say, come to the office and you're going to sit on Zooms all day. Come to the office for something. What is it? Is it a shared meal? Is it free coffee? Is it is it a talk from someone interesting for the staff? You have to make an offer. It has to be a lure, I think. I think Fridays are probably gone forever. The data shows that working from home has gone up and has stabilized. But it has stabilized. This country doesn't like the office. We're probably in the office fewer days than the rest of Europe.
Really?
Yeah. So in France, they have a much more in-office profile. But I do think it's when you've even got remote teams, if you're set up as a remote business, I think Nick Bloom at Stanford, who's the great work from home expert, has just done some research showing that, when people do meet in person every month or every quarter, that has a notable knock-on effect on engagement, productivity, what have you. So it's fine to have a remote, hybrid, whatever business, but the meeting in person thing is so important. And maybe it doesn't matter how many days you're in the office. Maybe 2 is fine or 3. I would probably guess that it will go to 4 for many organizations in this country, maybe during 2026. I think if you're Goldman Sachs, you can have 5 because you've got 8,000 applicants for every job or whatever they get, I'm sure. But for most of us, I think Friday or Monday is a day at home. And I don't think that's coming back because that deep focus work is really valuable that we can do at home. But I'm a great fan of the office, but I think employers do have a responsibility to offer some sort of carrot rather than just telling people to come in.
Absolutely right. I can't believe it. We can't believe how much we've covered in our half hour, but I also can't believe we got to the end. I really enjoyed today as well. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
I hope we're all going to be happier for listening to this.
Yeah, guys, cheer up.
Thank you, Felix.